The wind carried an eerie hush across the skeletal remains of what was once the city of Raleigh. Rusted cars sat frozen mid-escape, their doors ajar like silent screams. Storefronts were shattered, flags torn, and traffic lights blinked with no one to watch. America had fallen. Not with a bang, but with a slow, relentless decay that started in whispers and ended in silence. Among the ruins, a lone figure moved swiftly but cautiously, Daniel Rourke, a former firefighter turned survivor. His boots crunched glass as he made his way through an abandoned pharmacy, rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes scanning every shadow. The air was thick with dust and memories, but Daniel had learned to feel more fear for the quiet than the noise. In this new world, silence didn't mean safety. He was searching for antibiotics. Not for himself, but for his sister's daughter, Lily, the only family he had left. She lay feverish inside a makeshift shelter deep in the metro tunnels, a network of darkness that had become a fragile sanctuary for a small group of survivors. Without medicine, she wouldn't last another day. The shelves were mostly bare. Anything useful had been picked clean long ago. Still, he moved methodically, checking every crevice. A shuffle behind the counter made him freeze. His fingers instinctively gripped the stock of his rifle. He rounded the corner in a swift motion, weapon raised, but it wasn't one of them. A boy, maybe 16, sat against the wall, bleeding from a deep gash on his leg, his face pale and hollow. Daniel cursed under his breath. "Hey! You bit?" he barked. The boy shook his head rapidly. "No. Just a cut from a fence. Please, don't shoot." Daniel hesitated. In this world, kindness often came at a cost. But leaving the kid would make him no better than the creatures roaming outside. "What's your name?" Daniel asked, lowering the gun slightly. "Ty," the boy muttered, wincing. "I was heading west. I heard there's still power near Denver. A safe zone." Daniel wasn't interested in fairy tales. He'd heard those rumors before, about safe zones, military rescue, working radios. None had been true. Still, the boy looked too weak to move, and Daniel didn't have time for debate. He grabbed a nearly empty first aid box and tossed a roll of gauze toward him. "Wrap it tight. Don't slow me down." Ty nodded, grateful. They stepped outside together into the fading daylight. Clouds rolled overhead like bruises in the sky. Daniel led the way down the street, keeping close to buildings, eyes on every alley. Then, without warning, a low growl echoed from the shadows. One by one, they began to emerge. 3. No, 4 of them. Their skin was pale and torn, eyes lifeless, mouths twitching as if recalling the memory of speech. Daniel motioned for Ty to stay low. The boy was trembling. "You ever shoot before?" Daniel asked, handing him a pistol. Ty's hands shook, but he nodded. "A little. My dad used to take me hunting." Daniel raised his rifle and took aim. The first shot cracked through the street, echoing across the buildings like thunder. The nearest walker dropped, its skull shattered. But the noise was a beacon. From every alley and broken doorway, more began to pour out, slow, jerky movements gathering momentum. "We have to move. Now!" Daniel shouted. They ran, ducking behind wrecked vehicles and fallen signs. Ty tripped once but scrambled up. Daniel fired behind them, trying to keep the undead at bay, but they were relentless. Tireless. Unending. Finally, they reached the edge of the city and slid down into the metro entrance. The stench hit them instantly, a mix of decay and damp concrete. But to Daniel, it was familiar, almost safe. He sealed the iron door behind them and activated a crude alarm wire he'd rigged from tin cans and fishing line. Inside, the tunnels were dimly lit with flickering lanterns. Daniel's small group of survivors gathered, eyes wide with fear and curiosity. Among them, Elena, a former nurse, and the de facto leader when Daniel was gone. "Did you find anything?" she asked urgently. Daniel pulled out the tiny bottle of antibiotics. "It's not much, but it'll help." She nodded, already moving toward Lily's cot. Daniel turned to Ty. "This is your home now. You pull your weight, you stay alive." Ty looked around, awed by the network of survivors who'd found ways to survive in the dark, some armed, some broken, all fighting their own battles. But as the survivors began to settle for the night, Daniel's eyes remained fixed on the closed tunnel entrance. Something felt off. The growls he'd heard earlier, they weren't just random. The horde hadn't wandered by accident. It was like they were following him. Tracking. And Daniel feared the worst, that the undead were beginning to remember. The tunnels should have been silent. But they weren't. Somewhere in the distance, deep in the labyrinth of rusted tracks and sealed-off routes, something moved. It wasn't the ordinary shuffle of the undead. It was slower. More deliberate. Almost like it was, listening. Daniel stood guard just beyond the main shelter zone, a dim lantern swinging from a hook behind him. His rifle rested against his shoulder, but his knuckles were white around the grip. The alarm wire he'd set was still intact. No cans had rattled. No wires were tripped. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone anymore. From behind him, soft footsteps approached. "Elena. You haven't slept," she whispered, placing a hand on his arm. Daniel didn't look at her. "Something's out there. There's always something out there." "No. This feels different." She hesitated. Ty's fever broke. The antibiotics helped. He asked if we really have to stay down here forever. Daniel let out a humorless laugh. "Tell him he's free to try his luck upstairs." Elena stayed quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Do you think it's true? What he said, about Denver still having power?" "I think hope keeps people alive just long enough to get them killed," Daniel muttered. Before she could respond, a sharp sound echoed through the tunnel, not from their wire traps, but something deeper. Metal against concrete. A dragging sound. Followed by another. Daniel tensed. Then, a whisper. It was impossible, there were no echoes like that in these tunnels. No reason for words to form where no voice should exist. But there it was again. Not a groan. Not a moan. A whisper. "Find them." Elena froze beside him. "Did you?" "I heard it," Daniel said grimly. He handed her a pistol. "Get back to the others. Keep quiet. No lights." She nodded and moved swiftly, disappearing down the bend. Daniel stepped forward into the black, his lantern casting long shadows that danced along the damp walls. The whisper didn't come again. But the dragging sound returned. Slow. Patient. As if whatever it was didn't need to rush. He reached the old tunnel junction, a three-way split marked by broken signs and a collapsed security gate. That's when he saw it. One of the walkers. But not walking. Standing. Perfectly still. Staring. Its eyes, milky and dead, seemed locked onto Daniel in a way he'd never seen before. Like it knew what it was looking at. Like it recognized him. Daniel raised his rifle. The creature tilted its head. Daniel fired. The shot echoed like thunder underground, followed instantly by an avalanche of noise. From every tunnel, groans erupted. Dozens. Maybe more. Daniel turned and sprinted, his feet slamming the ground as the first can alarms began to jingle frantically behind him. The horde was coming. Back in the shelter, chaos broke out as the survivors grabbed weapons and children. Elena was shouting orders, trying to keep panic from spreading like wildfire. Daniel burst through the entry gate. "They're coming. They found the main tunnel. How many? Elena demanded. I don't know, but too many. Ty stood, shaky but alert, holding his pistol. What do we do? Daniel looked at the map on the wall, hand-drawn by a previous survivor. A maintenance shaft about 300 yards north connected to a service exit near the outskirts of the city. He pointed. We take the tunnel north. Quiet and fast. We'll seal it behind us and pray it buys us time. As the group began to move, a small child clung to her mother, whimpering. Daniel bent down. What's your name? Rosie, the girl sniffled. He gave her a gentle smile. You like stories, Rosie? She nodded. Then here's a story, the monsters never win. Not when the good guys stick together. Can you be brave for me? Rosie wiped her eyes and nodded again. With the sound of groans growing louder behind them, the group moved, their shadows long and uncertain. The walls dripped moisture. The air grew colder. But something was still off. Daniel turned to Elena as they reached the first steel door. They're learning. That one walker, it didn't lunge. It watched me. It waited. You're saying they're becoming smarter? I don't know what I'm saying. But I think we're running out of time. He slammed the steel door shut and twisted the lock. Behind it, the darkness growled. But ahead, a faint breeze. The promise of open air. And whatever came next. The northern tunnel was narrow and lined with crumbling brick, the floor slick with age-old grime. As the survivors pressed forward, their footsteps echoed in the dark, careful and uncertain. Every sound, the shuffle of shoes, the clink of gear, seemed amplified. It wasn't just the fear of what was behind them anymore. There was something ahead. Daniel led the way, flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. Elena stayed at the rear with Ty and Rosie. The others, 12 in total, moved between them in a single file, whispering prayers, holding weapons, carrying hope like a flickering flame. At the halfway point, Daniel stopped abruptly. He raised his hand. The group froze. In the distance, faint, but unmistakable, came a low metallic clang. Then another. It wasn't the undead. It sounded like tools. Someone's here, Daniel whispered. Elena narrowed her eyes. Military? Maybe. Or worse. The survivors pressed on slowly. Around the next bend, light spilled from a small opening in the wall, unnatural light. Someone had rigged a battery-powered lantern just inside an old electrical room. Daniel peered in first. His instincts screamed caution. Inside were bedrolls, wrappers, tools, and fresh footprints in the dust. Elena stepped beside him. Could be other survivors. Daniel didn't relax. Or raiders. They didn't have time to investigate further. A sudden yell echoed from deeper within the tunnel, not undead, not animal, but human. Move! Daniel barked. They ran toward the sound, not out of recklessness, but because anything loud in this world drew attention. And if someone was yelling, the dead were already coming. They reached a chamber where the tunnel widened near an old maintenance platform. There, in the center, stood a man in tattered gear, swinging a steel pipe at two snarling infected. His back was against the wall. Daniel didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and dropped both walkers with 2 clean shots. The man slumped to the floor, breathing heavily. Thanks, he rasped, coughing. Name's Carter. You just saved my neck. What are you doing down here? Daniel asked. Same as you, probably. Trying to survive. You alone? Carter hesitated, then nodded. For now. My group got hit last week. I've been hiding in the bypass tunnels. That room you passed? Mine. Daniel glanced at Elena, then back to Carter. We're headed to the service exit up ahead. You know it? Carter nodded. About half a mile, give or take. But it won't be easy. That path collapsed recently. I was trying to find another way out when those things found me. Then we dig, Elena said firmly. We don't have a choice. The group pressed on, Carter now part of their ranks. He guided them through tighter spaces, past derailed metro cars and collapsed beams. The air grew stale. Oxygen thin. Finally, they reached the blockage, a thick wall of debris where the tunnel roof had caved in. Rusted beams, concrete chunks, and old support wires sealed the way forward. Daniel stared in silence. We don't have hours, Elena said. The walkers will be on us in minutes. Carter pointed to a narrow side tunnel, barely wide enough for one person. There's a vent line. It curves around and connects to the exit shaft. Dangerous, but it's something. Daniel looked at his group, civilians, kids, the injured. We don't have a better option. They started sending people in one by one. Daniel went last, watching the rear with Carter. The tension hung heavy in the stale air. Then, from the tunnel behind them, a sickening sound echoed, the scraping hiss of bone and skin on concrete, and footsteps. Not limping. Not dragging. Running. Daniel's stomach dropped. They were running. He grabbed Carter's arm. Go. No time. From the dark, the figures burst into view. Not many, maybe 3, but they were fast, coordinated, almost tactical. One jumped from a ledge, lunging like a predator. Daniel fired, hitting it mid-air. It crumpled, twitching. Carter pulled Daniel toward the vent line just as the others came into view. They scrambled through the narrow tunnel, hearing the shrieks behind them. The undead were no longer clumsy. They were evolving. As Daniel emerged on the other side, he slammed a rusted grate closed behind him, sealing the last vent hatch. Rosie cried softly in her mother's arms. Ty sat against the wall, shaking. Elena knelt, catching her breath. And Carter just watched Daniel with cautious respect. Those weren't normal, Carter said. No, Daniel replied. They're not just hunting anymore. He looked toward the rusted service ladder that led to a trapdoor above. Daylight shimmered faintly through the cracks. They had made it out of the tunnels, but not out of danger. And now, the war above would begin. Rust flaked off the trapdoor as Daniel shoved it open, letting in the harsh light of day for the first time in weeks. The group emerged one by one, squinting at the ruined world above. The city was gone, or rather, it had transformed into a skeleton of what once stood proud. Skyscrapers were hollowed out, roads cracked open, cars left to rot where they'd crashed. Ash floated in the air like snow. But it was the silence that hit hardest. It wasn't peaceful, it was ominous. Like the earth itself was holding its breath. Daniel scanned the horizon from the rooftop of the old municipal building they'd surfaced onto. Smoke curled up in the distance, likely from a fire that had never been put out. He could see the Colorado plains beyond the city. That was the direction they'd head next. He turned to the group. We don't stop here. We move before the noise from below brings more. Where? Elena asked, holding Rosie close. West. Carter says there's a small military outpost past the river. If it's real, we'll find food, shelter. And soldiers with itchy trigger fingers, Carter added. Daniel met his gaze. Better than rotting down there. Ty helped load up the few salvaged supplies. His strength was returning, though he still limped slightly. I'm just happy to feel wind again, he muttered. They descended to street level, weaving through the back alleys to avoid major roads. Every corner was a risk. They passed the remains of another survivor group, tents torn, food scattered, and blood staining the concrete. No bodies. Just drag marks. Daniel crouched and examined the ground. This wasn't days ago. Hours, maybe. Carter frowned. They're getting bolder. They pressed on. Around midday, the group reached an abandoned convenience store. Daniel and Carter swept the inside while Elena secured the outside perimeter. Inside, it was mostly stripped bare, shelves overturned, fridges broken. But behind the counter, Daniel found something unexpected, a handwritten note taped to a battery-powered radio. If you can read this, 99.7 FM, we're still alive. Headed west. He turned the dial slowly. Static. Then, a faint voice. Repeat, if you can hear this, we're organizing a secure zone in the Western Ridge facility. Limited space. No infected allowed. All survivors must prove immunity or be quarantined. This message will repeat. Daniel's heart skipped. It's real. Elena stepped in, her eyes lighting up as she heard it. That's only 50 miles from here. Carter didn't smile. It won't be a straight path. They left the store and continued, passing through a burned-out school bus blocking the road. Daniel led cautiously, the group moving like shadows. But as they emerged from the bus, a sharp crack split the air, a gunshot. Daniel dove, pulling Ty down. Elena screamed, shielding Rosie. Carter crouched low, rifle drawn. Sniper. Carter hissed. Rooftop, east side. Another shot rang out, hitting the pavement inches from Daniel. This isn't a random attack, Daniel said. They're targeting the group. Why? We're not infected. Elena shouted. Doesn't matter. Some survivors shoot first, ask later, Carter muttered. Daniel made a quick decision. Split left. Into that parking garage. The group bolted for cover, weaving between abandoned vehicles. The sniper fired twice more, narrowly missing a woman named Claire in the rear. She tripped but was pulled up by Ty, who ignored the pain in his leg to keep her moving. Inside the garage, the silence returned. Dust swirled in the filtered light. They crouched behind a rusted SUV. Daniel turned to Carter. You said your old group was hit. This happened before? Carter hesitated. Yeah. A group near the river. Raiders with military gear. Ex-soldiers maybe. Trained. Armed. They don't want company. Great, Elena muttered. So we've got smart undead below and psycho mercs above. Daniel nodded grimly. And we're walking right into the space between. A thump echoed from above. Then another. Boot steps. They were coming down into the garage. Daniel motioned for silence and pointed toward a narrow stairwell exit. He mouthed, go one at a time. Carter took the lead. Daniel stayed back, rifle trained on the upper level. A shadow passed overhead. Someone was hunting them. But Daniel had no intention of becoming prey. The stairwell was tight and claustrophobic, with broken lights hanging overhead like dead vines. Carter led the way, weapon drawn, his eyes scanning every corner. Elena followed, Rosie in her arms, her free hand gripping a rusted crowbar. Daniel stayed at the rear, pausing every few steps to glance upward, listening for movement. The sound of boots on concrete echoed above. The snipers weren't alone. As they reached the alley behind the parking garage, Carter signaled them to stop. A voice called out ahead, calm, composed, and disturbingly polite. You can come out now. We saw you run in. No point in hiding. Daniel peeked around the corner and saw them, 5 men in matching gray tactical gear, weapons slung casually, confident in their stance. One stepped forward, unarmed, hands raised in peace. Name's Victor. We're not here to hurt you. Unless you make us. Carter muttered, he's lying. Daniel stepped forward anyway, his rifle at the ready. "You fired on us." Victor chuckled. "Warning shots. You came from the tunnels. That usually means biters, or worse, people who've gone too long without rules." Elena stepped beside Daniel. "We've got kids with us. No infected. No threat." Victor's smile didn't fade. "Good. That means we can talk." He waved his hand, and his men lowered their weapons, but didn't holster them. Victor motioned to the remains of a bookstore across the street, now converted into a makeshift camp. "We have supplies. Food. Safe place for the night. We don't take in many, but your group seems different." Daniel didn't trust the offer, not even a little. But the people behind him were exhausted. Rosie was pale. Ty was limping again. And the group hadn't eaten in nearly a day. He nodded slowly. "All right. One night." Victor smiled. "One night's all it takes to change your luck." Inside the bookstore, the group was split. Some were grateful for the shelter. Claire found clean water and cried quietly as she drank. Others, like Ty and Carter, never let go of their weapons. Daniel and Elena sat near the windows, watching the street outside as the sun dipped low. "I don't like this," she whispered. "Something's off. Too quiet. Too clean." Daniel nodded. "They didn't ask our names. Didn't check for bites. Just let us in like it was a game." Nearby, Carter was already searching the shelves, not for books, but for signs. Behind a row of old survival manuals, he found a trapdoor. "Storage," he muttered. "Maybe." He waited until nightfall, then called Daniel and Elena over quietly. "You trust me?" Carter asked. Daniel didn't answer. He just nodded. They slipped downstairs while the others slept. A single bulb flickered above. Boxes of food lined the shelves, real food, canned goods, dried meat, preserved fruits. Enough to feed 30 people for months. Then they saw the cage. Steel bars. Locks. And inside, a man, barely conscious, chained to the wall. His arms bore needle marks. His eyes glazed with fever. Carter stepped forward. "You see it now?" The man in the cage stirred. "They said they were doctors, research, help." Daniel turned away, jaw clenched. Suddenly, footsteps above. Victor's voice echoed down. "I was hoping we'd talk tonight, Daniel. Just you and me." They turned, guns raised, as Victor descended, calm as ever. "You're smart. You saw what others missed," he said, gesturing around. "We're not monsters. We're scientists, survivors with purpose. We're studying the virus. We need subjects. Those who've had close encounters. Those who survived bites." "You're experimenting on people," Elena hissed. Victor didn't deny it. "Some sacrifices must be made. You know that. You've seen what this world has become." Daniel aimed his rifle. "You're no better than the undead." Victor's smile faded. "Then what are you, Daniel? A leader? A protector? Or just another man who chooses who lives and who dies?" Carter fired first. The shot hit Victor in the shoulder, knocking him back. Chaos erupted. Upstairs, shouts rang out. Carter grabbed the keys, freeing the prisoner. Daniel helped him up while Elena covered the stairs. "We have to go. Now." The group raced through the back of the basement and into a storm drain Carter had found earlier that day. Gunfire chased them, but Victor's men were caught off guard. By the time they reached the surface again, the bookstore was a distant blaze behind them, smoke curling into the sky. Rosie held tightly to Elena, eyes wide. Ty didn't ask questions. No one did. Daniel looked back once, toward the burning building. The living, he whispered, are more dangerous than the dead. Rain lashed against the ruins of the city as the group trudged westward through the wasteland. Their clothes were soaked, their faces pale from exhaustion, but none dared complain. Behind them, the faint glow of the burning bookstore flickered in the distance like a cruel reminder of what they'd just escaped, and who might be following. Victor wasn't dead. Daniel knew it in his gut. And men like him didn't forgive. They hunted. "We need higher ground," Carter said, pushing his soaked hood back. "The river's coming up soon. It's going to flood fast in this storm." Daniel looked at the road ahead. Cracked pavement ran between decaying buildings and overturned buses. Farther down, the skyline dipped, toward the riverbank. He nodded. "We'll head for the bridge. There might still be cover on the rail line above it." Claire stumbled, her ankle twisted. Ty caught her just before she fell. "You okay?" he asked gently. Claire forced a smile. "Better than being in a cage." Elena glanced back at Rosie, who was shivering under a thermal blanket. "She can't walk much more in this rain." Daniel paused, scanning the horizon. "There's a maintenance yard up ahead. If it's clear, we stop there. Just long enough to rest." They pushed forward through the downpour, boots sloshing in rising water. The wind howled through shattered windows and twisted signs. Thunder cracked overhead like artillery fire. When they reached the yard, it was half flooded and fenced in by barbed wire. A collapsed trailer offered partial shelter, and they took it without hesitation. Inside, it smelled of rust and mold, but it was dry. Quiet. Too quiet. Daniel and Carter went to scout the perimeter while the others huddled inside. Elena dried Rosie's hair with an old jacket. Claire leaned against a wall, eyes closed. But then, a faint noise. A moan. Not human. Carter turned sharply, rifle up. Across the yard, 3 figures stumbled from the shadows, drenched and snarling. One had no jaw. Another dragged a chain from one leg. The third moved faster, more animal than man. "Infected," Daniel muttered. "Runners," Carter corrected grimly. "They're learning." The first runner lunged. Gunfire echoed through the storm. Carter dropped one, Daniel the second, but the third reached the trailer before a shot could stop it. Inside, Elena screamed. Daniel bolted back just in time to see the creature crashing through the doorway. Claire swung a metal pipe at its head, knocking it off balance. Ty lunged forward with a crowbar and drove it straight into the runner's skull. It collapsed, twitching, but dead. Rosie cried. Elena wrapped her arms around the child tightly. "It's over." "It's okay," she whispered, but her eyes said otherwise. Daniel stood in the entrance, soaked, bloodied, rifle still smoking. "We're not safe here. Not even for an hour." Carter grunted. "Then we keep moving." They left the trailer behind and crossed the bridge before the river could rise further. The rail line above gave them a vantage point, and a chilling view. Fires burned in the distance. Flares lit up the sky in irregular bursts. But far off, beyond the smoke, they saw something unexpected. Lights. Steady. Patterned. Electric. A fence. Towers. Movement. It was the Western Ridge facility. "There it is," Elena whispered. Carter didn't smile. "Looks like it's still holding." Daniel adjusted his grip on the rifle. "Then that's our destination. We move at first light." But the group was worn thin, and now, Victor's men knew they were heading west. Back at the ruined bookstore, Victor stood among the embers, arm in a makeshift sling, eyes fixed on the direction the group had fled. "They're going to the ridge," he said coldly. One of his men nodded. "Should we intercept?" Victor stared into the fire for a long moment, then smiled faintly. Let them get there. Let them think they're safe. Then we'll break the illusion. The walls of the Western Ridge facility loomed high above the wasteland, their floodlights casting cold white beams over the ground like unblinking eyes. For the first time in weeks, the group saw true infrastructure: concrete towers, electric fencing, and guards in uniform, real ones. Rosie gasped at the sight. Are we, finally safe? No one answered. Safety had become a foreign concept. They approached cautiously, hands raised. Carter carried Ty, who was now burning with fever. Claire had found a red cloth and tied it to a stick, waving it in surrender. The guards on the wall watched silently. Then, a loudspeaker cracked to life. Step forward. Weapons down. No sudden moves. Daniel dropped his rifle first. Carter hesitated, then followed. They were searched at the gate. Scanned with handheld detectors. A medic checked Rosie and Ty first, then the others. No signs of infection, only exhaustion and injuries. An officer in a clean uniform approached. I'm Lieutenant Ava Monroe. Welcome to Western Ridge. Her words were calm, rehearsed. Her eyes were not. Inside the facility, it looked like a world preserved in time. Lights buzzed in buildings that hadn't seen collapse. Children played inside fenced courtyards. Soldiers patrolled in organized shifts. There was food, hot showers, and even beds with blankets. But beneath the surface, something felt off. Too controlled. Too silent. They were kept in a separate quarantine wing, told it was just precautionary. Locked doors. Cameras in every corner. Daniel paced the room while Elena comforted Rosie. Ty lay unconscious on a cot, sweat beading on his forehead. Carter stood by the small window, watching guards move in tight formation. This place doesn't breathe, he muttered. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Carter turned. Places like this should have noise. Life. Arguments. Something. But here? Nothing's out of place. It's like a display, polished, perfect, fake. Before Daniel could respond, Lieutenant Monroe returned. We have questions, she said. You came from the east. There aren't many left who do. Daniel crossed his arms. We're not here to trade intel. Just looking for safety. Monroe's eyes narrowed. Safety comes with trust. And trust has to be earned. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. We'll run blood work. Just routine. The moment she left, Carter shook his head. Routine my ass. They're looking for something. Later that night, Claire snuck into the hallway after spotting a maintenance worker swipe an access card. She followed him quietly and found something chilling, a lower floor filled with occupied hospital beds, each with an 4 drip, and restraints. Most weren't sick. They were unconscious. Sedated. She returned to the room, face pale. They're experimenting, she whispered. Not just research, control. Daniel's jaw clenched. Victor was right. In the worst way. There's no sanctuary. Just new cages. Suddenly, a siren wailed through the halls. Lights turned red. An overhead voice blared, breach in the eastern sector. Undead presence detected. All non-personnel to remain locked down. The group huddled close, heartbeats thundering. Then, a knock. Not from the door. From the air vent. Carter ripped the panel open. A boy, no older than 15, crouched inside. Dirt-smeared and shaking. You have to leave, he whispered. They're not going to let you out. Ever. Daniel pulled him out. Who are you? Gabe. I've been hiding here. My family, they took them downstairs. Said they were helping. But none of them came back. Claire's voice broke. Why are they doing this? Gabe looked up at her, eyes wide. They think they can stop the undead. But to do that, they need people who survived bites. Carriers. People like Ty. All eyes turned to the boy on the cot. Ty was awake now, barely, but his wound was glowing faintly under the skin. Not infected. Not dead. Something else. We have to get out, Daniel said. Carter grabbed his pack. Back through the fence. We wait for the breach to pull guards away. Gabe nodded. I know a way. As alarms blared and chaos spread through the compound, the group made their move, slipping into the shadows of the sleeping sanctuary, now exposed for what it truly was. The facility was falling. Alarms shrieked. Gunfire echoed through the concrete halls. Screams, both human and inhuman, ripped through the air as the dead surged through the eastern breach like a black tide. Spotlights flickered. Chaos reigned. In the lower levels, Daniel and the others moved fast, following Gabe through maintenance tunnels. Ty, weak but conscious, leaned on Carter. Rosie held tightly to Elena's hand, her face buried in her side to avoid seeing the fallen guards they passed. They're too busy fighting the horde, Gabe whispered, leading them up a metal stairwell. Now's our chance. Suddenly, the stairwell vibrated with thunderous footsteps. Two guards came charging down, faces pale. Run, one shouted. They've overrun command. A shriek cut him off as a pale figure dropped from the ceiling. The runner tore into the guard's throat before anyone could react. Carter shot it clean through the head, the echo deafening. We're out of time. Daniel growled. They emerged into the west yard of the facility, only to find the outer gate sealed and guarded by a tall electric fence. Dozens of civilians stood there, begging to be let out, trapped between the undead swarming the courtyard and the barrier designed to keep them safe. Victor stood just beyond the fence, watching. Daniel froze. Claire whispered, he made it here first. Victor smirked when he saw them. Told you we'd meet again, Daniel. A blast shook the ground behind them. A watchtower exploded, collapsing in flames. The dead swarmed in, ignoring the fleeing soldiers and heading straight for the gathered civilians. Victor raised a loudspeaker to his mouth. Open the gate, he said. And give me the boy. The one who survived the bite. Carter cursed under his breath. Elena clutched Ty protectively. Victor continued, give him to me, and I'll let the rest of you live. Refuse, and I'll turn this whole facility into ash. Daniel looked to the others. We don't have a choice. He won't stop. Not until he's got what he wants. Ty sat up, trembling. Let me go. If I go to him, he might spare you. Elena shook her head violently. Don't say that. No, Daniel said, his voice firm. We're not sacrificing anyone. Rosie suddenly pointed. There, by the garage. An old supply truck. Carter nodded. If we can break through the fence with it. Daniel was already moving. Cover me. He and Carter ran through the smoke and fire to the vehicle. Claire and Elena shielded the others behind a broken wall. As Daniel hotwired the engine, Victor screamed over the loudspeaker, last chance. Then, the engine roared. Carter yelled, now. The truck smashed into the outer fence, crashing through with a burst of sparks and a hail of broken metal. The path was open. Daniel waved frantically. Go! Go! The group sprinted, dodging infected and fire alike. Claire carried Rosie. Elena dragged Ty. Gabe helped guide them through the opening. Victor opened fire. Claire dove, shielding Rosie. The bullet missed. Carter returned fire, grazing Victor's shoulder. The warlord fell back. The group piled into the truck. Daniel hit the gas. They roared out into the wasteland, leaving the crumbling facility behind. In the rearview mirror, they saw the floodlights dim. The walls breached. The scream swallowed. Western Ridge was gone. Later that night, miles from the ruins, they stopped on a quiet hill under the stars. Ty lay wrapped in a blanket, his fever broken. Claire tended to his wound. Gabe and Rosie slept side by side. Elena sat beside Daniel, staring at the horizon. "What now?" she asked quietly. Daniel looked out over the darkness. "We keep going. Not because there's somewhere left to go, but because we're still alive." Carter leaned against the truck, reloading his last magazine. "Dead America," he muttered. "No cities. No safety. Just ruins and ghosts." Daniel shook his head slowly. "Not just that. There's still us. Still people who fight. Who protect. Who don't give in." A long silence passed. Then Claire added, "Maybe one day, we find others. Build something again." Daniel stood, rifle across his back, eyes hardened but calm. "Until then," he said, "we survive. Together." End of Part 8. Story complete. Let me know if you'd like a full series recap, a trailer script for YouTube narration, thumbnail ideas, or a next story based in the Dead America universe.